Hey there, I'm host Deep Singh Hero. In this video, we're going over how to build Shopify apps, Shopify embedded apps with Next.js, Prisma, and Planetscale. So, first things first, before we go into this video, I just want to update. I know by now a lot of you already know this. I also do teach a course on how to make Shopify apps. That's available at createshopapp.com. You head in there, that redirects you to Gumroad, which is where the course is actually hosted, and you can get the course from here. Right. So that out of the way, let's get into building the app. Now, I maintain this open source boilerplate that has everything hooked up and ready to go. So let's copy this. And now let's pull this to desktop. And I'm going to clone this, CD, and let's open it in VS Code. Great. So now we have the entire repo here. First, let's go over the entire folder structure. The first is the developer, which contains two files. The types are obviously for types. One is the toml writer, which writes your shopify.app.toml file from your env. And the second is the update dashboard, which is deprecated. But if you're on the older OAuth model, this is where you would uncomment it. So this will now throw an error with all the code still in there, just in case you still want to use it and you're coming from the older stuff. We can ignore .github, we can ignore .vs code. Components contains all of the components. Average provider, we'll kind of come to it one by one about like what each and every single thing does. The next is documentation. The entire repository comes in with well-documented stuff, from notes, like, hey, why have I done certain things in a certain way, to how to set up the entire repository. And there's like a huge checklist, and even snippets, which I'll kind of show you a little later in this video. And then because this is a Next.js project that uses pages folder, you have the pages folder with a bunch of stuff, in here, and you have the API folder, which again, a bunch more stuff. We'll come on this in a second. Then you have the Prisma folder that hosts your Prisma schema. Then you have your public folder, which is nothing, but it has git keep, so we can actually push it out, right? And then it has utils, which contains all of your middlewares, where all of your webhooks go, and a bunch of other utility functions, right? And then you have your standard env example. This is how we create a env, a get ignore, prettier, and prettier rc and prettier ignore. You can modify this however you want. I prefer my projects to be kind of done this way, so that's what I use. Vercel ignore, if you're hosting on Vercel, this is what's being ignored by default. So we don't want the developer folder to be added in the build, so that's what we do. JSConfig is your JS configuration file. This is just like tsconfig if you're from a TypeScript base. But yeah, so if I take a look at this, it's going to throw you an error, which is fine. We can easily ignore it. It's because of these comments. Check.js and no emit essentially give you TypeScript like checking and type safety. So it's going to cry about every single thing and scream at your face. This was added after a lot of requests of, hey, can you make up a TypeScript version? And I was like, we have very good JS docs in there, and I do not want that compile time. And doesn't matter how much you do for the TypeScript fanboys, there's not enough that you can do, right? Someone needs something else. So, this disabled by default, you can just enable it and you're good to go. Your base URL and path, this is so that you can import a lot of your modules very quickly, right? Then you have a standard license. This is MIT license. Middleware. We'll come to this in a second. Then you have next config that exposes the setup check function, which again we'll come to in a second, and a bunch of envs in here. Then you have your package.json and your readme. So first, let's go over package.json and see what all is happening here. The first thing I want to talk about is we're using nothing custom, and all of this is from official repositories, right? So we're using Shopify Polaris, Shopify's UI component library, and we're using Shopify API. This is an actual Shopify package that is very, very undermarketed. I feel like a lot of people just don't know this exists. And so you can head into GitHub/Shopify/Shopify API.js, then click on this one, and you're going to find all the documentation in here. So if I were to head into docs and open up, say, a reference, this is exactly what we're using, right? So whether it's auth, whether it's creating clients, there's certain abstractions that are built up on top of the existing layers so that it's easier for you to work on. But if you were to ever be like, hey, where does this come from? Or like, what package is this? This is official Shopify's repository that we're using. And this is always kept up to date. So you know that you can like blindly rely on this package and know that it will work out just well. Few of the packages we're using Prisma and Prisma Client for, well, as our database ORM, crypto for encryption, Next, React and React DOM of our Next.js and React.js. Next API middleware is so we can run heavy middlewares in all of our routes, which we'll come to in a second, and I'll show you how that works. Now, this is for reading TOML files and writing to TOML files. This is Shopify CLI kit, which as of right now in the manage install, we do not use at all, but we would use it in the previous one. But I'm still leaving this package in because one, it's a dev dependency, so we're not really too worried about it. And second, in case you want to use it, update URL, the older one, you have it available and you're not worried about finding out what to install. Then you have .env. We do not have to use the .env package in production because it's pulled up by default. So we don't have to depend on an external package to read our envs. ngrok comes pre-installed. npm check updates is to update all of your packages. Prettier is for prettifying, and then you have Prisma. And yeah, that's about it. Now, let's come down to your scripts. Dev, build, and start are pretty standard Next.js stuff. Pretty runs the Prettier across the entire repo. Update runs the npm update package, which is this one, right? So it updates all of the packages. For tunneling, we have two options. One is ngrok. So when you've just created an ngrok account, get in the access token and replace this with your access token, right? And just run npm run ngrok auth. And what that will do is it will create all of the files necessary for ngrok to kind of authenticate you as a user on the system. And then after that, you can just run npm run ngrok, get your URL, and paste it in there. Alternatively, if you're like me, I've started to like Cloudflare tunnels a little more. You need to have Cloudflare's tool installed already. This is not an npm package that I can pre-install for you. Just like with ngrok, if I come into my dev dependencies, it's already pre-installed, but sadly, I can't do that for Cloudflare. So Cloudflare D, this is something you can easily Google, install in, and you're good to go, right? Now, then comes all of the Shopify's packages. G-install, it's absolutely necessary that you run this. So while this is happening, I prefer bun. So I can just run bun, run G install. What this is going to do, it's going to install Shopify app and CLI's latest version globally. This is so you can run every single thing smoothly, right? Shopify is so that you can run all of your Shopify commands. So it could be npm run Shopify app deploy, right? Or you can run Shopify app deploy if you do not want to install it globally, which is why this is there. Update config, well, if you're coming from the older repositories, you're used to running update URL, which is now what's commented out. Update config is the newer one. What we're essentially doing here is you're calling the TOML writer first, which is what we saw a little earlier. What TOML writer does is it runs a setup check first. This ensures that all of your envs are properly set up. So all it's literally doing is it's checking if it's undefined, if it has HTTPS, and and it throws errors accordingly, just so that if you were to mess up your env file, you know very early on in your development, and you're not worried and spending 2 days figuring out where you went wrong. Now, what we do here is I've gone ahead and I've created entire types for this. So you can head into types in TOML and you can kind of read through this if you really want to. Do not remove this export. This export ensures that this this file is readable by JS config. And yeah, so you can read through that. Now, what this is doing is it's going through the env, every single thing, and it is updating the entire file, right? And it also checks for extension, places all of the TOML files in the right spaces, and it lets you know that, hey, everything's working fine. And after that, we run Shopify app deploy. Now, I know I pledged allegiance to using the CLI as less as possible, but we can't escape this now. So yeah, but then again, the good thing is you're not managing your TOML and your env in multiple other files. It's just one env that is your single source of truth. So if you have multiple files that you're managing, I would highly recommend you to take a look at TOML Writer and how it's working and add it in your package.json scripts. just so that you have one place or one file that controls your entire package, and every single other file that you need is built off of that, right? And Toml writer is, whoops, not this one. Yeah, Toml writer is what's using the Toml package to kind of read and write. All right, now database. Honestly, I can never remember these commands. It's always like, hey, how do I do this and how do I do that? So if I were to now, you know, I want to create a new Postgre database, I personally prefer MySQL, but I know a lot of you use Postgre, so which is why the thing ships with Postgre. I have those scripts kind of, in a separate place, so I copy paste them in whatever package I'm running. So let's create a new Postgre database and start it. So this means we run npm run pg create. This creates a new folder called database with all of the PG stuff. And then npm run pg start. That's about it. You don't have to worry about doing a bajillion things. That's it. All you need to ensure is you have pgctl installed, which is, how you install Postgre. If you're on Mac OS, you can just run brew install Postgres if you're using Homebrew. And that's about it, right? And then pg stop stops the database. npm run pg stop, and the database is stopped, right? And the database folder is by default added in your git ignore, so none of this gets committed ever. But of course, you can change up stuff, work around it that way. Just change database with something else. So this would be like my database, and you're good to go to, start up a new instance of Postgre on that folder. Then you have Prisma stuff. Uh, Prisma just runs npx Prisma, so it's easier. Some people prefer it that way. I don't really need this, but again, a lot of people prefer to have these handy. And then you can run, npx Prisma db push and pull to either push your schema or pull your schema. And then you have reserve scripts. What essentially happens with prepare is once it goes into your server, you want to generate the latest version of your Prisma client based on your Prisma schema. Prepare is a reserved keyword. So what ends up happening is the moment it hits your server and it's building, it runs npx Prisma generate. So whatever you're building on the server is always on the latest version of your schema. Because what could happen is, and I've seen this happen a lot, either people forget to run npx Prisma generate and they're like, hey, my Prisma does not work in servers, or they push up the entire node modules file. I've seen that too. And then they have an older version and then they can't debug. So prepare kind of ensures that you do not run into that issue, right? So this is all of the package scripts done. And now let's go one by one into this. The first thing is auth, right? This is the one thing that I absolutely want to cover up first. If you head into pages, if you head into API, you're going to see there's no auth folder anywhere, right? It's because we're using Shopify managed installation. What Shopify managed installation does is it takes away the whole idea of having to create this elaborate OAuth, callback, redirect, super complicated stuff. And now all you need to do is create a toml, tell Shopify like, hey, I do not want to be on legacy install, and that's about it, right? And then on your first load, you get a bunch of tokens that you exchange for a session token. So let's take a look at how that works. If you head into pages and index, you're going to find is initial load with a huge do not remove this in here. So let's open up is initial load. This is some JS docs, right? So what we do is we check if shop and ID token exists. The way Next.js works is as you're moving around, you remove all the query params unless you are, forcefully adding them in. So we know that this is only available in initial load. So if you find it, do all of that stuff. Else, you can do whatever you want in this. And then you return data props because you have to return something, right? So now what we do here is we are calling upon the Shopify package, which we'll come to in a second of how that's structured. You use Shopify auth token exchange, you give it the ID token, you give it the shop, and you are like, hey, I want the offline token. And then the same thing except with online tokens. And then you store it. Session handler is an abstraction that I built over the entire thing, right? And then you register all of your webhooks, and then you double check. So while this is registering, you immediately come down to, hey, let's double check if it's a fresh install. And there's some comments in here that let you know, like if you do not find any instance of fresh install, that means it's an absolutely new install. But if it was false, it's a reinstall, right? And then there's a new function to call fresh install. This is again being structured out so that it's easier to kind of work with. So in this file, you can do everything that you want on the first install. So this is where all of your onboarding emails and everything else come in. And this is where we also set is active to true. So if the shop does not exist, or if it has this false, it's set to true. And this prisma.stores is actually what's being read here. So if it finds the shop there, that's how we kind of figure out if it's a fresh install or if it's an older install, right? And then we're console logging the entire webhook response. A lot of people remove it and then they're worried about why things are breaking. I leave it in, even if it's clogging up my database logs a little bit. That's completely fine because it helps me debug the entire webhook issue, right? So if a console log or a console.dir is in there, it's so that, a little few days down the lane, when you are actually stuck in a problem, you can debug easily, right? So this is the entire auth setup. You do not have to think about doing OAuth. You don't have to think about doing all of that complicated stuff again. It's simple and it just works. And mind you, this is only for embedded apps. If you're running a third-party app or an external app, like I like to call it, you still need to use the older OAuth method. Right. So let's skip a little bit. Let's move on to Shopify.js, which is what's actually doing the entire thing. Again, in here, we read from Shopify, we pull in the node adapter because this is a node app, and we set up our Shopify configuration, right? There's also a bunch of stuff in here. If you want a lot of logs, maybe you're trying to debug a package or an issue in your network, this is where it comes. And then there's very standard stuff across the board. And this file also manages all of your webhooks. So if you were to add a new webhook, you can, you have this entire comment block in here that you can use. So if I wanted to add a new topic or a new webhook subscription, I'd copy this. I'd come in here, paste this, right? Let's say I wanted orders create. Now your URLs are always lowercase, so you can make that lowercase. And in your callback, you create a new function here. Now, all of your functions go into webhooks folder. It's under utils, and you create this a file with the same name. This is not necessary. This is so you can very easily understand what's happening. So, orders create.js, and this is where you can write your webhook. Now, the project actually comes in with a lot of snippets, which is really handy for spaces like this, because if you were to now create webhooks, you would have to go back, read the documentation, see the entire payload, then come back here and do it. A very nifty feature is you can just write create webhook. It'll give you this, hit enter, and you're good to go, right? So there's going to be orders create handler. This is my naming convention. You can use whatever you want. And then when you hit tab, it takes you to topic name. In here, let's write the exact thing, which is orders create. And so now what happens is your webhook body, this variable is of that orders create type. So you can actually go to webhook body dot, and now you have IntelliSense for that entire thing available to you, right? So these are all of the entries that come in, and there could be some bugs in terms of its types, but then these are just meant as a suggestion. And yeah, there's like always work on this happening in order to make sure that this is up to date. So if you find any bugs, please let me know. I'm more than happy to kind of work on it, right? So let's now just console log this webhook body, and that's it. And now that we've created this, we go back to Shopify.js in our topic handler, orders create handler, and you're good to go, right? So this is how you've just created a new webhook. That's all you need to do. Now, let's move on to the other middlewares. What's happening is every single time you hit a request, it must be verified, right? And it's absolutely necessary that it's verified. So we have is initial load, which we have already checked out. This is what's happening on the first load. Then you have verify HMAC. Verify HMAC is for your GDPR routes. Verify proxy is for your app proxy routes. Verify request is what your front end of your app, not your storefront. The storefront stuff always uses app proxy. The front end of your app makes a request which is validated here by verify request, right? And with middleware is Next API middleware that kind of combines this. This is what the API is. There's not much to explain here. Now, if I get into my util functions, there's a bunch of really great stuff. Client provider gives you online and offline clients to create GraphQL and REST sessions. So if you were to now create a new client, you could be const client equals await client provider dot. Do you want to use offline tokens, which is what I recommend, or do you want to use online? So let's do offline dot GraphQL client. Whoops, I think I haven't exported that. And then comes in your request and res. So rec res, right? And so now all you have to do, const response equals await client dot request, and your query comes here, which now works, right? So this is how you kind of set up a new client in your app. Great. So now that this is done, let's move on to encryption. This is a very simple one. This is to encrypt your stuff. So all of your session tokens that come in are encrypted by default. Fresh install is something that we've seen already. Prisma.js is where this is really handy for dev mode, because in dev mode, you could end up creating like 100 connections to your database that are all open. This ensures that you have, less of that mess. Session handler is where we are storing session. This is something that we saw earlier. So session handler dot store session, dot load session, and dot delete session. This is what we're just using all across, right? Setup check, again, this is something that we already saw. The Shopify.js, where we just created a webhook. Validate GWT is for validating GWT tokens. Now, I could have used a package here, yes, but the function is super small. So it does not make sense for me to kind of build this package out or, use a separate package for this, which is why I just wrote it myself. And it's pretty standard. It's using the inbuilt crypto library and it gets the stuff done, right? So now that out of the way, let's focus into getting into the app, right? The first thing you want to do is you want to set up your env. You can copy paste this into a new file, or you can run it via command line. CPR env example.env. What this does is it copy pastes everything exactly as is, right? Now, back in Shopify partners, you can hit create app, and you can come on this page, create app manually. Let's call it YouTube app. And I'm going to demonstrate something here, which is why we're using a very random name in this. Right, let's copy the API key. So you're going to copy it here and a little down. This is a quick install link, so I like to copy it here too. And then the client secret. Now, Shopify API scopes, let's do with read content, very standard stuff. We're going to come to the app URL in a second. API version, going to keep it to the latest one. I am going to do that for my Postgres string. And my encryption string is the base string that I'm using to package the entire thing, right? Now, my app name, remember how I put in YouTube app here? Let's call it new YouTube app, right? My app handle, new YouTube app. I don't need a proxy right now, but the moment I fill this in is when my proxy is immediately added in, right? Now, again, another quick hack. I'm gonna like fill this up. So I have my entire string ready, okay? Now let's start the database. I already created it, so I need to run npm run pg start. Now I need to also push my schema because the first time I'm doing it. So npx prisma db push. And whoops, looks like I didn't install stuff. So we're gonna quickly hit bun install. And yeah, that's done. Clear that, npx prisma db push. Okay, that's done too. Now what we're going to do in a new terminal window, we're going to run Cloudflare. You could use ngrok too. It's the exact same thing, right? Now we're going to copy the Cloudflare URL. I'm gonna replace that and add into our Shopify app URL. You need to make sure it starts with an HTTPS if you're using any of the service, and it does not have a trailing slash. Let's not do that. Even though there are checks in there, but it just makes more sense to not have it. It's so that it's consistent across the board, right? And now I'm gonna run run update config. Now what you're gonna notice is it's gonna create a new toml file with all of the stuff. And there you go. And now you have everything ready and set up for you, right? Your GDPR webhooks are in there, your include config is there, your access scopes are in there, your redirect URLs and everything else, right? And it's going to be like, hey, this is what's going to be changing. Yep, that's what we want to do. And there you go. You now have it. And now I'm going to run dev. So this is the equivalent to running npm run dev. I'm going to copy this URL, going to come over to my browser. And there you go. You have your install screen. You hit install. It goes in there. It's like, hey, let me register all the webhooks. Let me do all of the initial stuff. And now what you're going to see in the side is now it's called new YouTube app. So you have to be a little careful when you're filling up your env because you can, and I have done this a lot of times, by mistakenly rename your entire app, right? So please be a little careful with this. Do not make that mistake. Now, before we look at Polaris, let's kind of come back here and let's take a look at two absolutely important files. One is the document. Now, what's happening here is Average moved from a React package to being on a CDN. And this is what this is doing. So tomorrow, if you were to add a new script, make sure Average CDN is the first script that you're loading, right? If it's not, you're going to run into a lot of errors, especially with authentication and showing your app in there, right? And the second is underscore app. What's happening here is it's pulling in a lot of stuff from Polaris provider comes from Shopify Polaris packages. Average provider will look at it in a second. UI nav menu is a web component. This comes from Average CDN, right? And so you can take a look at all of the Average CDN stuff over here. You can hit explore and you can take a look at stuff in here. If I were to look at APIs, and if I were to look at UI nav menu was, I believe it was in navigation. No, it's not in navigation. So it's somewhere in here. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Yeah, so that's how we're setting this up. So you see this debug cards. This is how we are getting this in here, right? And now let's take a look at average provider. What's happening is average provider stops your app from being loaded outside of the iframe, right? So let's actually go ahead and copy our Cloudflare tunnel URL. And on a new tab, if I open this up, you're going to see like, hey, this is a dev error, but it's also going to be like, hey, sorry, no shop was provided, right? Why? Because we are reading the shop from window.shopify.config.shop, which is added by average. What you can do here, though, is you can create a simple page with Polaris that inputs a user's my Shopify URL. And then when they hit submit, it takes them to this page, which would then take them to an actual install, right? So that's there. And now if you do want to check out, we're like, hey, how does this actually look like? Let's just, do this. And so, yeah, like it's a very broken one. You're going to see in the console log, it's there. It's just really messed up, right? So, yeah, some people try to do this to, break your app, but we have this in here, so we don't have to worry about it. Right. Let's actually just also discard changes here, so we're not making any unnecessary changes. All right. So now that's done. Another file that we need to look at is the middleware. What middleware is doing is it's complying with CSP, or Content Security Policy. CSP is nothing but adding in headers so that your Shopify app can only load in a .myshopify.com URL or under admin.shopify.com, right? So this ensures that outside, it throws you an error every single time, right? So that's there. Now, with all of this out of the way, let's actually see what's, out of the package, what you get. So one is a bunch of these links. You get a link to the course, you get a link to app with CDN, and you get a link to the repository, right? So you can kind of start it, and I highly recommend you do it. You can just hit start here. And yeah, then you get a bunch of debug cards. Debug cards are really necessary in the sense that they give you these 4 very basic structures. Let's take a look at webhooks. Remember in my Shopify.js, we added this new orders create webhook. If I hit explore here and it's making a call, and this is not loaded. And now you'll be like, Hoshti, but why is this not loaded? And I cleared the entire console log by mistake. This was to demonstrate that sometimes you're gonna run into errors like this. The reason why this happened was you didn't have the right access scopes in there. So if I were to head back into my env, I would see that, hey, I only have read content in here. Let's also add in read orders, right? And now I have to update the entire app, bun run update config, because this is a major upgrade, right? So any change you make, you need to make bun run update config. And you're gonna like wait for a second. And it's gonna be like, hey, you know what? Access scope is updated. Let's hit enter. All right, clear bun run dev. Cool. And now let's go back to home. Whoops. Let's come back to new YouTube app. And what's going to happen is it's immediately going to be like, hey, we saw a new scope was added in. How about you approve it? So we hit update, right? So I haven't done anything except add that in. This is to show you how, again, seamless the entire OAuth process is. And now what's going to happen is when we head into debug cards and we head into webhooks again, it's still not registered. And you'll be like, Hosty, but I did add in the right scope. Let's take a look at our webhook console logs. And this is why you don't remove console logs, right? This app is not approved to subscribe to webhook topics containing protected customer data, right? And then you can kind of head in here to do that. But essentially what's happening is, let's copy this and let's open this up. This will take you to your app setups, API access, right? Let's actually get in here. So we are in the app, we click on API access on this side, and we go to protected customer data access. And then we hit request access. And then in here, I'm just selecting up a bunch of stuff. What you need to do is only fill up the first part in dev mode. When you're ready to go to production, then you have to fill up the entire thing, right? So I'm just gonna click random things in here. And this is in dev mode, but if you plan on putting this app into production, like this specific instance, I highly recommend you kind of fill it up properly. Otherwise, you're gonna have problems getting that stuff done, right? All right, so now this is done. I'm gonna go back home. I'm gonna go hit new YouTube app again. Let's clear console log on the side. And now we're gonna see that this actually worked out properly. Now, if I head into debug cards, I head into webhooks, and we're gonna see 2 webhooks in here, which is what we expected in the first place. And this is why we don't remove any console logs or any console.dirs that's, sprinkled very nicely across the entire project. Because if it wasn't for that console log, we would be stuck. And then, you're reading the docs, you're figuring things out, and you're like, Hoshdeep, what do I do now? Right? So that's webhooks. Then you have data fetching. This kind of shows you how data fetching works across the board. So you can actually be like, hey, you know what? This is a simple GraphQL call. This is a post request, and this is a regular request. Let's actually make a new endpoint, right? And let's make a call to it. Now, for this, I'm going to go back to my home. I'm going to go into my pages, index.jsx, and I'm going to create a new primary action, which is like make a call, and on action, async this. And now, if you come from the previous, updates, you would remember the use fetch hook. We don't have to use that anymore because exit frame is gone. And if you don't know what exit frame is, you're one of the lucky ones who have never had to deal with it. So, a moment of silence for everyone who had to use exit frame. All right. So now in here, const response, await fetch. Let's make it to /API/apps/test, right? And JSON this and console.log the response. And let's open up my log. Let's go to console. All right. Now let's make this entry, right? So we go to API, we go to apps, we create a new file called test.js. And now again, you can just write create API and it gives you everything that you need, right? So you do not have to worry about creating a try catch, adding in your handlers, all of that stuff. It's just done for you. Okay. So now all you want to do is run a console.log endpoint hit, right? And we're just going to return. That's all we're going to do. Now, if I come back here and I hit make a call, we're going to get text success, which is great. So now you would be like, hey, Harshti, but everything worked just fine. What's happening here? Let's make this exact same call, but outside of Shopify, right? So because this is coming from our own app, we're like, hey, this endpoint was hit, which is good. And now let's actually copy, where is my index, right? Let's copy this. Let's go to new tab. Let's copy that. And I'm going to head into my env back again. I'm going to get my Cloudflare URL. And I'm going to hit this and hit enter. What's going to happen is you're going to get error unauthorized call, right? Why is this happening? Because verify request stopped it. If I enter verify request, oops, not verify HMAC, it's going to be like, hey, no authorization header found, which is what error we have. And then it's going to be like, we're sorry, this is an unauthorized call. I can't let you make calls randomly, right? It has to be from your app. So everything is literally set up for you across the board. So you do not have to worry about any sort of stuff, right? And the same is with app proxy. If you were to do it for an app proxy route, you head into proxy route, you're like, hey, you know what? Let's call it test.js. And you're going to do create proxy, which uses a different handler. So instead of verify request, we're using verify proxy, and the process stays the same. You can make calls from the storefront, but you cannot make calls from anywhere else, which is what's expected of you, right? So, it comes with everything kind of set up. Please make sure not to forget to change it to the right request method, because there's been a lot of times where I'm like, hey, let's make a post request to this endpoint, but it's a get type. And then it's like, sorry, I can't really solve this, right? So you're going to get an error with a 4 or 5, which means that method does not exist. So yeah, you still have a lot of debugging in there, but just make sure you're not making these tiny mistakes. And if you want to see where all these snippets are coming from, you can head to snippets.md, and this gives you everything that you need to know, right? So I highly recommend using these because my workflow is a billion times better because of these, right? Now, back into debug cards, we have done data fetching, we've done webhooks. Billing API is its own video, so I'm not going to touch it. But essentially, you can come in here and you can subscribe your motion to a plan. It's not going to work immediately because your app needs to be on public distribution. So if it's a custom app, that's a problem. You need to head into your, app setup, go to distribution, and update to be a public app. So it's only then when this will work, or you will get error occurred. And then resource picker. This uses Abbott CDN, so you can hit search. You can get a bunch of products, hit select, and then it kind of spits out whatever Abbott has to offer. So yeah, this is a quick overview of how the entire thing works. And yes, you can just, hit Vercel publish, and this just works straight out of the box. You do not have to worry about configuring stuff. Just make sure you've configured your env, and that's about it. Yeah, thank you so much for watching the video. Please like, subscribe, all that stuff. All of my social links are down in the description. If there's anything specifically you want me to cover, please let me know in the comments. I would love to kind of sit down and really cover up all of that. Take care, everyone.